Listo, ya podemos iniciar.
Muy buenos días.
Gracias. Bueno, buenos días a todas y todos. Buenos días a esta audiencia número 9 del 180 periodo de sesiones. El nombre de esta audiencia es la situación de derechos humanos de personas en contexto de movilidad humana en los centros de detención migratoria de Estados Unidos. Esta audiencia fue solicitada por un conjunto de organizaciones de la sociedad civil, no la voy a mencionar a todas en aras del tiempo. En el día de hoy, bueno, yo soy Antonio Urrejola, presidenta de la Comisión Interamericana, y me acompañan en esta audiencia la primera vicepresidenta, la comisionada Yulisa Mantilla, quien además es relatora por derechos de las personas migrantes y movilidad humana. Está también la segunda vicepresidenta, la comisionada Flavia Piovesan, el comisionado Estuardo Ralón, la relatora de Derechos Económicos, Sociales, Culturales y Ambientales, y la secretaria adjunta de monitoreo, María Claudia Pulido. Está también obviamente todo el equipo de la Secretaría Ejecutiva que nos acompaña tanto en estas audiencias para hacerlas posibles, los intérpretes, como también todo el equipo técnico de las distintas relatorías involucradas en esta audiencia. Como ustedes podrán ver, abajo existe un mundo y para quienes requieren interpretación. In case anybody needs interpretation, you can put the interpretation down on the globe that you have on your screens. De acuerdo como corresponde en esta audiencia, en primer lugar, tendrán 20 minutos la representación de la sociedad civil. Les pido que por favor se vayan presentando a medida que hagan uso de la palabra. Posteriormente el Estado tendrá 20 minutos. Luego la comisión tendrá otros 20 minutos para hacer comentarios o preguntas, y posteriormente tendrán 12 minutos la sociedad civil y otros 12 minutos el Estado, para luego ir cerrando esta audiencia. Les pediría por favor que hagan respeto del tiempo. En sus pantallas hay un reloj que va corriendo de acuerdo al tiempo que les da, o sea, 20 minutos. Yo voy a intentar avisarles cuando queden 5 minutos, a veces no puedo porque está muy intensa la participación y no me gusta interrumpir, pero les pido por favor que hagan uso del tiempo. En cualquier caso, si el reloj tiene algún problema, que a veces nos pasa, el equipo de la Secretaría Ejecutiva también va tomando el tiempo para poder avisarles cualquier problema. Tienen también, ustedes podrán ver en la pantalla, no sé cómo se dice en español, closed caption, para las personas con dificultad auditiva, lo que también es bastante más nuevo en nuestras audiencias virtuales. Asimismo, esta audiencia está siendo transmitida en vivo, tanto en nuestra página Facebook como en Twitter. Lo de Twitter también es nuevo en este periodo de audiencia. Dicho lo anterior, entonces, le voy a dar la palabra en primer lugar a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil por 20 minutos y les reitero que por favor se vayan presentando a medida que hagan uso del tiempo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, commissioners. Good morning, and thank you for granting us this hearing. More than a decade ago, I first appeared before this honorable commission, as I do today, alongside, my name is Sarah Paoletti with the Transnational Legal Clinic at the University of Pennsylvania, Carey Law School. I appeared before this honorable commission, as I do today, alongside and on behalf of human rights and migrant rights organizations, advocates, and immigrants themselves to address human rights violations committed within the system of immigrant detention. A series of thematic hearings and a site visit to detention centers in the United States culminated in the Commission's 2011 report, Immigration in the U.S., Detention and Due Process. In the years that followed, the U.S. introduced new detention standards, but rights violations persisted as the United States' oversight and enforcement of those standards, and the standards of themselves have consistently fallen short of the United States' obligations to respect, protect, and ensure the rights of all those in its jurisdiction. Now, a decade since the Commission's 2011 report, we are again before the Commission because the United States persists in detaining immigrants as a means of immigration enforcement and deterrence. And immigrants and their families continue to suffer egregious rights violations as a direct and foreseeable result. The international community took note when a whistleblower nurse and women who had been detained at the Irwin County Detention Center joined with advocates here today and filed and publicized a complaint with the Department of Homeland Security that included reports of non-consensual gynecological procedures, some of which resulted in sterilization. You will hear directly from one of those women today, Wendy Dow, who's appearing under the name of Priyanka Bhatt for the purposes of this hearing. Azadeh Shashahani, the Legal and Policy Director of Project South, will discuss the United States' persistent failure to respect and ensure the rights of immigrants it holds in private corporations in Georgia, a failure that has directly contributed to the rights abuses at Irwin. Setare Gandhari, Advocacy Director for Detention Watch Network, will conclude our presentation by placing the United States' grievous failure to respect and protect the rights of individuals held at Stewart and Irwin facilities in Georgia in context, highlighting the rights abuses that are endemic to the United States' system of immigrant detention. The rights abuses, which are also detailed in our written submission, together with our proposed recommendations, include the following violations of the American Declaration and other rights obligations: the right to dignity and security in person, the right to health, the right to freedom from forced labor, the right to protection of family life, due process rights, the right to seek asylum, the right to freedom of expression, the right to non-discrimination, and the right to freedom from retaliation for exercising the aforementioned rights for all persons subject to its custody, as well as the right to freedom of expression for human rights defenders in Georgia and across the United States seeking to assert those rights. We seek recognition of and accountability for the grave and persistent rights abuses committed against immigrants held in detention centers in Georgia and across the United States, and the failure of the United States to take the necessary measures to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of those held in custody. We seek redress and reparations for those whose rights have been violated. And finally, we urge the Commission to call upon the United States to bring an end to immigrant detention. As the Center for Victims of Torture has just compellingly set forth in a report issued last week, the system of immigrant detention is inherently violative of the United States' obligations under CAT and other international human rights treaties and norms. It is not enough to talk of standards, as standards have done little to protect those taken into ICE custody and locked away in detention centers across the United States, as you'll hear this morning. Azadeh.
Thank you very much. Good morning, honorable commissioners. My name is Azadeh Shashahani. I serve as Legal and Advocacy Director at Project South and also co-counsel on the class action lawsuit that was filed on behalf of survivors of medical abuse at the Irving County Detention Center in Georgia, which was the site of systematic medical abuse against immigrant women, including forced sterilizations. We have in fact documented conditions at Irving for many years, and we know that the treatment of immigrants at this prison has always been horrid. In our 2017 report, In Prison Justice Inside Two Georgia Immigrant Detention Centers, Project South and the Penn State Law Center for Immigrants' Rights Clinic found evidence of sexual abuse, inadequate medical care, lack of prenatal care for pregnant women, lack of clean drinking water, and rampant use of solitary confinement at this prison. Those who have spoken about the abuses over the years have consistently faced retaliation. In September 2020, our complaint filed alongside other groups on the ground with the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General also highlighted issues related lack of protection for COVID. So for example, medical staff deliberately not testing detained immigrants for COVID-19, even when they were symptomatic, had pre-existing conditions, and or had requested to be tested multiple times spanning a month, and management mandating employees to work even when they were symptomatic and waiting for test results. The shocking revelations about medical abuse against women's bodies further highlight the extent of the egregious abuses at the prison and the fact that Black and brown immigrant women have been held in an extremely vulnerable position at this prison where they had no control over their bodies and no say about what was done to them is sickening. We are glad that our complaint opened the door to more women coming forward with accounts of what was done to them. In total, more than 40 women filed sworn testimony in court as part of the lawsuit, despite consistent attempts by ICE to silence them. It pains me to know that there could be many more women out there who will never be able to talk about what happened to them and the abuse that they suffered while at Irving, let alone receive a measure of redress, while living with the lifelong damage to their bodies and spirits. Not surprisingly, ICE has not been forthcoming with information. Rather, they've been actively trying to cover their own tracks through deporting survivors and witnesses to medical abuse. If it was not because of the documentation work happening and advocates' efforts to track down and reach out to women all over the world and courage of the impacted women, none of this would have ever come to light. ICE already deported 6 survivors and was trying to deport several more before lawyers and members of Congress stepped in. And they also used tactics of retaliation against those who spoke out, such as threats of placing women in solitary or actually subjecting them to solitary confinement. The court filing also includes evidence showing that ICE and private contractors at the prison knew as far back as 2018 about the medical abuse being inflicted on women, and yet they did nothing. Instead, they kept sending women to this same doctor. Pursuant to the class action lawsuit, all known survivors of medical abuse have now been released. However, women are now transferred to the Stewart Detention Center, a deadly corporate-run prison with a forced labor program and a documented record of other egregious human rights violations. This is an extremely troubling development and a clear attempt by ICE to deflect attention from abuses at Irving. There have been 8 deaths at Stewart since May 2017, 2 by suicide, 4 during the pandemic. And in fact, Stewart has been the deadliest ICE prison during the pandemic. There have been more than 700 cases of COVID-19 infections at Stewart, yet ICE continues to detain the elderly and people with pre-existing conditions at Stewart during the pandemic, which tells you how much they don't care about the well-being of people in their custody. In addition, internal documents show that ICE surveilled human rights advocates' protest activities, including ours in Georgia, and considered retaliating against them for it. Instead of addressing the grave issues that advocates are raising, ICE is using intimidation in an attempt to silence us. In closing, in terms of what we need for accountability, the scrutiny must not stop with examining the actions of one individual. This is about ICE and the private prison corporation LaSalle. Both Irving and Stewart must be shut down immediately and people should be freed. And the egregious retaliation against those who spoke out must end. The women who suffered medical abuse should receive redress for the harm that they suffered, and the US government, as well as the private prison corporations running these prisons, must be held accountable. And I would like to leave you with this quote from freedom fighter Fannie Lou Hamer: "Nobody's free until everybody's free." Thank you very much. I would like to turn it over to survivor Wendy Dow, who was detained at Irving and is courageously joining us to speak out now.
Hi, hello, good morning, each and everyone. My name is Wendy Olivia Dow. I'm one of the survivors of Irving County abuse. And I'm the survivor of retaliation from ICE because I spoke out. I went to Irving County back in September 2018, the 28th of September 2018. From the day I entered Irving County, it's like I was in hell. The place, how the place look, and the treatment from the get-go when you get there. In January of 2019, I think I was suffering from abdominal pain. I suffered with hypertension. And at the time, because of the stress I was going through, my hypertension went worsen. So I was suffering from abdominal pain. So I text medical, written, and send it to them, send a request to them. They refer me to Dr. Amin. When I went to Dr. Amin, he told me that I got multiple cysts in me. And the first day I went, he gave me a depot shot. I think on my second visit, he told me that I got a tumor as big as a cantaloupe. After then, I was woken up like 5 a.m. one morning, asked where I was going. They can't say protocol. They can't tell me where I'm going because of their safety. When I went there, I went to Irving County Hospital. Because of my hypertension, my vision was going, and I wasn't in the right frame of mind then. After I woken up, I know that they gave me an injection. After I woke up, I was woken up in Irving County medical room. At the time, I was like woozy and start feeling pain down in my lower abdomen. When I try to feel what's going on, I felt like 3 bandages on my stomach. Starting to ask the nurse what happened. They told me that they can't answer me until they get the medical form from Dr. Amin. Later after that, I was still sick, couldn't get up, couldn't walk. No medicine, no pain meds, no antibiotics, nothing, no gauze, no treatment from nurses or anything at all. I repeatedly asked them for pain medicine because I was just gutted into, and no type of pain medicine. After the fact, I noticed I was getting eye fever. After I went into the bathroom and looked, my stomach was like yellow. I was suffering from a lot of infection from the wounds. I start writing to them again, tell them that I have an infection. That's when they came and they gave me antibiotics. They gave me 1 dose of pain medicine, told me that my refill was expired. After the fact that I was sick and everything, I noticed that they take me back to Dr. Admin. I'm not specific when or what time, but they took me back and he told me that I have to have a hysterectomy. That's when I tell him that I'm not gonna have no more surgery based on what I went through last time. I signed a refusal form then not to have a hysterectomy. They took me back to Irving County where I start questioning everything. So I start speaking to guards and everything when they told me that, some of the guards told me that I don't need to do no surgery because Dr. Admin is fake, and they start telling me about stuff that happening to other females. I start looking into it. That's when I call Project South and I call Family for Freedom, trying to get my voice out, trying to let people know what's going on. Based upon the phone, I couldn't get through a lot. That's when I spoke to one reporter. After start speaking to a reporter, ICE agent found and telling me that, I was talking to ICE agents, I was talking too much, and I was calling the 9116 number. I was calling the Inspector General's number and everything. So me and one of the ICE agents, we got into it. After that, I was in solitary confinement. Then they brought me I was in solitary confinement because of my hypertension. I couldn't breathe. I was hyperventilating. So they took me that night to the trailer where they called G. After being there, I couldn't get a lot of phone calls. I couldn't get to reach out to anybody. So I couldn't get any tablets or anything. So shortly after that, they still brought me to Dr. Admin like 2-3 times to have a hysterectomy. When I went to nurse school called me and said I'm refusing medical help. I'm telling her, I'm not refusing any type of medical help, but I'm not going to have another surgery in this situation that I'm in. The place is dirty. It's not capable for no humans to be there. It's nasty. And based upon what I went through, I'm not going to do it again. They keep forcing it on me until they said I got psychiatric problem. They try to refer me to psychiatric evaluation, try to refer me to the psych ward. I'm telling them I'm not going there because nothing is wrong with me. After they try to tell me that based upon the tumor that I have in me, that's what's sucking my blood, that's why my vision is going, that's why I'm dizzy. I sucking to what they were telling me. So I went to the psych. They start giving me pills that react to my body very badly. I start telling them I'm not taking no more pill and I'm not going to no more psych ward. ICE now start telling me that I need to sign a form that I'm refusing medical help. So if anything happened to me, it's not on them. After being there, suffering, one day I fell into the shower because of lack of vision in G. That's when I hit the back of my head, hit my back. When I get up, I was in medical. The medical nurse trying to tell me that she's trying to send me out to the hospital, but she can't send me without somebody to give her the go ahead to send me out. That night, they couldn't get a higher person to send me out. So I stayed all night at Irving County suffering from that pain. In the morning came, they wheelchair me to the medical when they tell me that I'm fine. Up until this day, I'm suffering from that heartache that I went through in that bathroom. I'm suffering from medical. I'm suffering from physical, mental abuse, and I'm still going through it. And all I'm asking, and why I'm speaking out, for this to stop, for it, a next person, a next woman, a next mother, a next child don't have to go through the humiliation, the suffering that me and my children went through. I have a 12-year-old disabled child that is here now with me in Jamaica. Can't get any medical help, can't get anything. I can't take her to the doctor because she's an American citizen. It's money down here and everything. It's like I'm in a country that I'm not used to because I've been in the US over a decade. And I got a 15-year-old that was abused while my incarceration. She was only 15 at the time. So I'm asking, please, I'm pleading for it to stop, for nobody else to go through this type of abuse. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Satara Gandhari. I'm the Advocacy Director at Detention Watch Network. What you heard should shock the conscience. Unfortunately, these experiences are not unique to the state of Georgia. They're emblematic of the entire US immigration detention system, which is a part of the US system of mass incarceration that has a disproportionate impact on people of color and in particular on Black people. Over the last 24 years, Detention Watch Network has monitored and documented abuses throughout immigration and customs enforcement, ICE detention, which has expanded over that time to include over 200 detention centers and jails across the country, detaining 55,000 people at its height in 2019. Currently, there are over 26,000 people in ICE detention, a number that has been rapidly increasing over the last few months. Every year, up to 500,000 people are detained in ICE custody. As you will see in our written submission, there's an extensive history of abuse and neglect in the US detention system, documented over decades by civil society, government inspectors, and journalists. Despite small wins in oversight and attempts at transparency, the system has only grown more abusive and deadly as it rips communities and families apart. This past year, as the world grappled with COVID-19, the inhumanity of immigration detention has only been heightened. Immigration detention is punitive in nature and fundamentally at odds with the concepts of human rights, dignity, and freedom. The detention system is rife with a lack of access to adequate healthcare and even medical abuse, as you have just heard. This past fiscal year, 21 people lost their lives in ICE custody, the deadliest year since 2005. Staff often exhibit a callous disregard for the health of the people in their custody, ignoring requests for medical attention or offering inadequate or inappropriate care. During the pandemic, there have been reports of people being told to stay quiet about their COVID symptoms, sent back to their quarters with little more than Tylenol, or put in punitive isolation, not medically appropriate quarantine. There's been a lack of testing and spotty and insufficient access to vaccination. ICE fails to provide adequate access to the most basic necessities like toilet paper, shampoo, soap, toothpaste, let alone face masks. The food they serve is often rotten or expired, including, for example, slimy chicken, moldy bread, foul-smelling lunch meat. At many facilities, people are completely isolated from community and legal support and have no access or little to outdoor recreation. Instances of verbal, physical, and sexual abuse are well documented. Often abuse such as pepper spray or isolation are in fact retaliation for people speaking up for themselves and asking for their basic needs to be met. Over 70% of detention facilities operate through intergovernmental agreements between the federal government and state and local governments. Often these are then passed through to private prison companies. Over 80% of people held in ICE custody are in facilities operated by private prison corporations. This means that almost the entire system is motivated by profit. Companies and governments get paid for each human they detain, literally profiting from human suffering. Often, companies and local governments get paid for a minimum number of beds, regardless of the number of people they actually detain. These types of contractually guaranteed minimums motivate ICE to fill beds to avoid the appearance of wasting government money. However, I must underscore that removing the profit motive alone is not sufficient, and that facilities owned by the federal government have the same track record of abuse. Like the brave women who spoke up about the abuse they faced at Irwin, people in detention across the country have been speaking up for themselves, telling us about the abuses they face and demanding freedom. From sit-down strikes and work stoppages to thousands of detained people participating in organized hunger strikes last year during the pandemic. People risk their lives and face the very real threat of retaliation, including physical force, rubber bullets, solitary confinement, force feeding, and deportation. We must honor them and follow their lead. State governments across the United States have been taking action to ban private prisons and keep ICE detention out of their states, from Maryland to Washington to California and others. It's time for the federal government to act. Today, we urge the Commission to call on the United States to take the actions necessary to respect, protect, and ensure the rights of all those under its jurisdiction. This means immediately ending all contracts with private prison corporations and all intergovernmental agreements between the federal government and state and local governments for the purpose of immigration processing and detention as a first step towards completely dismantling the use of immigration detention. And as long as the COVID-19 pandemic continues, the right to health means that people must be released from detention for the sake of those detained, as well as for the public health. I refer you to our written submission for a more detailed list of recommendations and for the extensive documentation that we've offered that explains more about the abuses that have gone on in the system over the years. And again, I thank you for your time and look forward to a dialogue with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I didn't want to interrupt, but you took 4 more minutes. So I will rest them afterwards, because afterwards we have 12 minutes. So you will have 8 minutes at the end, okay? Thank you very much. And especially thank you, Wendy, for your testimony. I will give now the floor to the representatives of the state.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Buenos dias. It's very much an honor to be here. Good morning, honorable commissioners, petitioners, the secretariat staff and colleagues, and especially to Ms. Dow on behalf of the United States Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. I welcome the opportunity to participate in today's hearing and to engage with the IACHR and petitioners on these important matters relating to the promotion and protection of human rights. My name is Kathy Culleton-Gonzalez, and I was appointed on January 20th by President Biden to serve as the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Officer for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, or CRCL. I'm designated by DHS to protect civil rights and civil liberties and to ensure that the department meets our international human rights treaty obligations. Today, I want to provide you with more information about recent efforts the department has taken, as well as to express our commitments to continue the immigration reform and racial justice work begun at the advent of the new administration. Equally as important, I'm here today to receive your feedback and concerns and to consider ways to address the issues we've heard about today. To update you, since January 20th, pursuant to several immigration-related and equity-based executive orders issued by President Biden, we have been working to improve our immigration system to make it more orderly and humane. These improvements include seeking to provide greater opportunities for non-citizens to apply for any form of relief or protection for which they may be eligible, including asylum, withholding of removal, and protection from removal under the regulations implementing the U.S. obligations under the Convention Against Torture. We have begun processing into the United States individuals who had been returned to Mexico by the last administration. The department is also conducting a comprehensive examination of current rules, regulations, decisions, and internal guidelines governing the adjudication of humanitarian protection claims and determination of refugee status to help ensure that the United States provides protection for individuals fleeing persecution or torture in a manner consistent with our domestic laws and international obligations. These measures may alleviate some of the pressures on detention. Second, on January 20th, the then acting Secretary of Homeland Security issued a memorandum on the review of an interim revision to civil enforcement and removal policies and priorities, and called upon DHS to coordinate a department-wide review of all policies and practices concerning immigration enforcement. These include policies governing detention. As a result, DHS is reviewing its detention policies, including procedures around arrests and policies that govern the care and protection of vulnerable populations. The department is also launching a new Alternatives to Detention pilot program that will provide community-based case management services in select geographic locations to individuals. The pilot program will include mental health services, human and sex trafficking screening, legal orientation programs, cultural orientation programs, connections to social services, and for individuals who will be returning to their home countries, departure planning and reintegration services. The pilot program is being led by CRCL, my office, in collaboration with ICE and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Further, DHS is also committed to strengthening its oversight of the conditions in detention confinement facilities and to close ICE detention facilities that do not meet the health and safety requirements in ICE's detention standards. On May 20th, Secretary Mayorkas directed ICE to prepare to discontinue the use of Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia, a facility about which you raised particular concerns today, as well as the C. Carlos Carrero Immigration Detention Center, also referred as Bristol, in Massachusetts. The Secretary signaled that the department will not tolerate the mistreatment of individuals in civil immigration detention or substandard conditions of detention. Secretary Mayorkas further indicated that he will continue to review concerns with other federal immigration detention centers and has instructed DHS leadership to provide updates on ICE's current and potential operational needs, the quality of treatment of detained individuals, the conditions of detention, and other factors relevant to the continued operation of each facility. We are working among several oversight offices. For our part at CRCL, oversight of DHS immigration detention facilities is a key part of our mission. CRCL reviews and investigates complaints from the public and/or reports by other sources alleging violations of civil rights or civil liberties by DHS personnel, programs, or activities. Complaints may include allegations about inadequate conditions of detention and alleged violations of non-citizens' rights while in detention. For example, CRCL works within the department and ICE to strengthen safeguards against sexual abuse and assaults of people in DHS custody, including by conducting investigation into ICE's handling of sexual abuse allegations. Once CRCL opens a complaint, we refer the complaint to the department's Office of Inspector General, excuse me, which has the right of first refusal to investigate the allegations that were submitted to us. If the Inspector General retains the complaint for investigation, CRCL generally must wait until the Inspector General has completed its investigation before we can determine whether to conduct our own investigation, if necessary. If the Inspector General decides to investigate the complaint, it is returned to CRCL for our investigation. CRCL opened 4,884 complaint investigations from 2014 to 2020. Of these, 2,607 alleged inadequate medical or mental health care in detention facilities, 447 alleged inappropriate conditions of detention, 267 alleged excessive force, and 136 alleged abuse of authority by DHS employees or contractors. In fiscal year 2020, CRCL conducted 8 on-site investigations at facilities where individuals were in ICE custody. In FY21, we have already conducted 5 investigations, and we are planning to conduct 6 more. After investigating, CRCL provides senior leadership of the components with our investigative conclusions of all complaints and any applicable recommendations. CRCL also notifies the complainant of the results of the investigation, except in instances where we are unable to contact them. CRCL's complaint recommendations have prompted DHS components to implement improvements to policies and practices and to create and update training materials. CRCL has issued numerous expert recommendation memoranda resulting from on-site investigations into conditions of detention for individuals in ICE as well as CBP Border Patrol custody. CRCL recommendations have led to improvements in detention facility conditions in the areas of medical and mental health care and improvements in training and oversight. Our expert recommendations have also informed CRCL's ongoing work with components such as ICE on issues extending beyond investigations, including CRCL's review of ICE's hoteling practices and COVID-19 readiness. 53% of CRCL's complaint investigations involve allegations of inadequate medical care in ICE facilities. In these cases, CRCL and ICE removal operations maintain a process for referring and addressing complaints received by CRCL concerning the medical, dental, and mental health care provided to individuals in ICE custody. Through its work with ICE removal operations, CRCL strives to, 1, bring emergent medical concerns to ICE's attention when detained individuals may be at imminent risk of harm. 2, inquire about and receive sufficient information from ICE to resolve and close alleged concerns that are unfounded and that have been adequately addressed. And 3, determine whether there are any remaining additional or systemic medical concerns that call for further inquiry or investigation by CRCL. The success of these medical referrals relies heavily on ICE providing a timely response. CRCL has interfaced with the ICE Health Services Corporation regarding life-altering conditions such as HIV, cancer, and other serious medical and mental health concerns, and we intend to continue to do so. We do so with the aim of assisting ICE Health Corporation to immediately address the issues for individuals in ICE custody and to improve the overall quality of medical, dental, and mental health care pursuant to detention standards that facilities are required to follow. Let me talk about Irwin. CRCL has specifically addressed complaints related to medical care and other conditions at Irwin in the past. In July 2016, CRCL conducted an on-site investigation of Irwin, examining concerns related to medical and mental health care, use of force, food service, segregation, recreation, and the grievance system for detained individuals. Pursuant to our investigation, which was informed by subject matter experts, CRCL issued a memorandum to ICE containing 26 recommendations to address deficiencies in the areas of disinfection and sanitation practices, communication and procedures on the handling of infectious disease outbreaks, record keeping and documentation, and language access. ICE concurred with nearly all of CRCL's recommendations and implemented many of them. CRCL also received a number of allegations about unnecessary gynecological procedures performed on detainees at Irwin without informed consent. These allegations are being separately investigated by the Office of Inspector General. Due to pending litigation, DHS is unable to comment further on these allegations, but I can report to you that Irwin is being closed. I want to assure you that our work to address concerns in ICE detention facilities is ongoing. My office, CRCL, is committed to fully investigating all alleged abuses referred to the department to ensure that they are appropriately addressed. CRCL will also continue to play an important role moving forward as DHS looks closely at detention-related issues through our work on developing guidance for evaluating detention facility conditions and concerns. CRCL will also provide proactive advice on how DHS can strengthen and further incorporate principles of civil rights and racial justice into the policies and procedures around immigration enforcement and detention. CRCL engages with ICE and Border Patrol to revise and strengthen enforcement and detention-related policies, procedures, and training to protect vulnerable populations, including unaccompanied children, members of the LGBTQI+ community, as well as individuals with limited English proficiency and persons with disabilities. We also work directly with ICE to encourage the release of vulnerable individuals from ICE detention. Since day one of this administration, CRCL has worked to identify key civil rights principles in several areas, including to inform the department's revision of its civil immigration and removal priorities, its approach to emergency and temporary housing and care for migrant children at the border, and in the department's enforcement and detention posture. On April 27th, DHS issued new guidance to limit ICE and Border Patrol enforcement actions in or near courthouses, recognizing that, quote, executing civil immigration enforcement actions in or near a courthouse may chill individuals' access to courthouses and as a result impair the fair administration of justice, end quote. The department is also currently reviewing its policies on civil immigration actions at other sensitive locations, as well as on the arrest and detention of vulnerable populations. where DHS saw an increase in the number of families and unaccompanied children entering the country between ports of entry, we worked quickly alongside other federal partners and the American Red Cross this year to find appropriate, safe, and sanitary housing for families and unaccompanied children in order to move them more quickly outside of Border Patrol stations. Under the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008, DHS must transfer the care and custody of unaccompanied children to the HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement within 72 hours after determining that the minor child is unaccompanied. Furthermore, to limit the days that families and children spend in a custodial environment, ICE ceased to operate one family residential center, and in March 21, converted 2 remaining family residential centers to under 72-hour staging facilities. CRCL is also leading a sexual orientation and gender identity working group, which is examining LGBTQIA+ equity concerns within DHS's workforce, as well as in public-facing policies and programs, such as the care of LGBTQIA+ individuals in DHS custody. If I may, I also want to speak directly to the concerns raised with regard to deaths of non-citizens in DHS custody and the increased medical vulnerability of detained non-citizens during the COVID-19 pandemic. DHS has made important updates to detention policies and training that address the concerns raised by petitioners, including establishing clinically appropriate procedures for the physical and mental health care and treatment of detained individuals. CRCL is doing other important work that intersects with detention reform by carrying out DHS's commitment and the Biden administration's commitment to racial justice and equity work. We do this with the awareness, as petitioners have stated, that the overwhelming majority of persons impacted by immigration policy are people of color. CRCL leads a department-wide equity task force to help DHS implement the administration's goals on advancing racial equity, combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation, and condemning racism and xenophobia. I'm also a member of the White House Gender Policy Council and leading the gender equity efforts for DHS. On June 14th, we announced that USCIS is implementing a new process referred to as bona fide determination, which will give victims of crime in the United States who apply for U visas access to employment authorization sooner. And the majority of people impacted by this improvement are women. CRCL is also assisting DHS in remedying the previous administration's unjust immigration policies, such as the zero tolerance policy that cruelly separated families at the border and the Muslim ban, which was rescinded on day one of this administration. We are committed to continue to dig deeper and root out other systemic equities and inequalities. And that is why, again, thank you for this opportunity and appreciate your attention to these critical issues.
Thank you very much. Just 1 minute over the time, so it was fine. Thank you very much. I will give now the floor to my colleagues. First of all, Ambassador, sorry, you want to take the floor now? I see your hand up.
Is this yes, if this is the appropriate moment?
You can either now or you can either afterwards. You have more 12 minutes more afterwards, after the commissioners make any questions.
Let me just make a very brief intervention now. I had planned to introduce Ms. Culleton Gonzalez, but we got our roles mixed up here. So let me just thank the Department of Homeland Security's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Ms. Culleton Gonzalez, for sharing the U.S. statement. And on behalf of the U.S. mission to the OAS, we thank the IACHR for the opportunity to meet today with civil society in this public hearing to address these important issues. The United States strongly supports the work of the IACHR, and we regard the institution as vital to the promotion and protection of human rights in the Western Hemisphere. Public hearings such as the one today play a key role in the inter-American system to ensure that OAS member states are mindful of human rights challenges in their respective countries. We recognize that the United States, like all countries, has work to do. The Biden-Harris administration has committed to advancing the promotion and protection of human rights of all persons, as demonstrated through a series of statements and actions, and as outlined by Ms. Colotin Gonzalez. We again would like to thank the petitioners for sharing their concerns and express our sympathy to those who may have suffered as a result of previous policies. I now turn it back to you, Madam President. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I will now give the floor, first of all, to Second Vice President Flavia Povesano, who is also the rapporteur for the United States.
Thank you so much, Madam President. First, I'd like to express our deep gratitude and our recognition for this important public hearing, which gives visibility and voice and face to a pattern of serious human rights violations, especially in migration detention in the US. And again, I'd like, as our president just mentioned, I'd like to express solidarity and empathy to the voices of all the victims here represented by the hurting testimony that we heard. And I'd like also to recognize this network embracing universities and NGOs, which made this moment possible, and also the US representatives offering us precise information. I just have one question. I heard and I took note about all the announcements concerning sexual abuse, sterilization. The Commission last October 2019 adopted a press release on this, raising concern about sterilization and the denounce of sexual abuse. And we heard the lack of access to health care, lack of drinking water, and all the challenges concerning lack of protection of more than 700 persons with COVID-19, and the intersectional approach, because we have this impact, especially concerning Afro-descendant, women, LGBTI, and migrants. So we have here all those criteria, I'd say, aggravating the level of extraterritorial discrimination. And I took note, and I'd like to recognize, and for us, for the Commission, for us, this new administration gives hope, because we can see changes. As a rapporteur for LGBTI rights, I remember at least 3 or 4 tweets that we recognize concrete advances. So, and we have also the thematic rapporteurship for Afro-descendants, for women's rights. So here we have to recognize concrete efforts and change in the US and this message to the region. But to be honest, here we face still a dramatic situation. So my only question to the state representation is there a plan to close, to reduce those more than 200 detention centers devoted to migrants? Because that's the point that really calls my attention, this criminal approach to human mobility. I heard, and it's really, as I mentioned, it gives us hope to see all the concrete measures, all the efforts and the commitment that we know is deep and is sincere to have human rights as the core of the policy, the state policy in the international affairs. But having said that, is there any plan to dismantle and to reduce and to close this system of migrant detentions of migrants? So that's my question. And thank you so much once again, as a country rapporteur as well. For us, it's really important to see all this move and all concrete and precise changes that we recognize concerning this new administration. Thank you so much, Madam President.
Thank you, Commissioner Piovesan. I will give the floor to First Vice President Commissioner Mantilla, also Rapporteur on Migrants.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to start with, well, thank you all of you for being here, but I'd like to start with a special message to Wendy for your testimony. Thank you very much. As you said, it was not only for you, but for any other children, women, families that they shouldn't suffer what you did, what you suffered. And I just wanted to remember something that is very basic, but I always keep repeating, no? It's about when we read the Universal Human Rights Declaration, it starts saying that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and human rights. The Universal Declaration didn't mention anything about nationality, legal status, etc. So I think it's important to remember that all the time, because here we're talking, and I'm talking now as a reporter of migrants, because we were talking here about detention, immigration, detention center, and we shouldn't talk about detention, because detention, I mean, any state has the right to establish a specific policy for migration, but detention for migrants, it sounds very strong. Other than that, listening to Wendy and all the information that even the representatives of the state have recognized about the difficult and complicated and very hard situation and condition in these centers, I like to ask first to the state about, they mentioned about the gender training, etc., but I'd like to ask specifically about the database, statistics, what happened with women, specific women, children in this center, you know, other than the things that you're going to do, what's going on right now? I'm talking about sexual and reproductive rights. What about sexual abuse? If there were children born after rape in these detention centers, what's going on with that? Because listening with this testimony that Wendy shared with us, that is very, very moved, we're talking about torture. And even though any state didn't ratify the Convention Against Torture or even the American Convention, the prohibition of torture is a norm of jus cogens, imperative norm. And I would like to read as well the Restatement 3rd of the Foreign Relations Law of the United States of 1987 established, you know, the jus cogens norms, and it established the prohibition of torture, you know, before the Inter-American Court, of those the opinion of the court, the restatement of the Foreign Relations Law of the state established the prohibition of torture, you know. And other than that, I like to talk, because you talk about the new policy, and I really, really recognize that. I think it's very important that you don't have any more these migrant protection protocols and these new policies, and the Commission has recognized that last week in one press release about this, and Commissioner Piovesan has recognized as well these things. I like to hear from the state about reparation, because you're talking about non-repetition, about the future, but what's going on with victims of this situation, despite the nationality? You know, that is very good that the things are changed for the future, but what's going on with this person that suffered that? Because when we have a human right violation, in the same moment that we have this violation, it is born a right to reparation. So I like to hear about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Mantilla. Commissioner Ralón.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Muy buenos días a mis colegas, así como a los representantes de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, representantes del Estado. Y primero quisiera comentar que me ha impactado el testimonio que muy valientemente ha dado Wendy, y quisiera agradecer su fortaleza de podernos trasladar nuevamente una vivencia realmente traumática. Y lo más complejo de esto es que es una voz que pudo sobrevivir en una serie de denuncias donde nos han dicho que incluso han existido alrededor de 20 personas fallecidas que no tendrán y no tienen la oportunidad de comentar esta situación, como Wendy hoy se convierte en esa voz tan importante de poder denunciar una situación totalmente en contra de la dignidad de cualquier persona. Yo soy relator de personas privadas de libertad y de combate a la tortura, y lo que hoy se ha comentado, pues obviamente en la descripción es un trato cruel, un trato inhumano, un trato degradante. Y sobre esa situación yo tenía dos preguntas, una pregunta para el Estado y otra pregunta para las organizaciones. Para las organizaciones mi pregunta es cómo ellos evalúan la implementación de estos cambios de política que el Estado ha dicho. ¿Cuál es su reacción? Si es algo que ven como algo efectivo, inmediato, o que ven que no es suficiente a la magnitud del problema. Esa sería mi pregunta. Y con relación a los representantes del Estado, mi pregunta es si hay alguna política en marcha de reparación a las víctimas, tanto a las familiares de las personas que fallecieron como algunas otras víctimas que sí pudieron sobrevivir a esta situación. ¿Hay en marcha alguna política de reparación para ellos? Esa sería mi pregunta. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, comisionado Ralón. El equipo de la Secretaría Ejecutiva quiere hacer algunas preguntas. Les pido, por favor, precisión, que estamos sobre el tiempo. En primer lugar, a la Secretaria Ejecutiva, Tania Renaud. Está sin audio, Tania. No, no se escucha. Escríbeme el WhatsApp y yo hago la pregunta por ti mientras le doy la palabra a la relatora Desca, si quieres, Tania.
Gracias, Presidenta. Buenos días y agradeciendo todas las informaciones recibidas. Registro pues una especial preocupación desde el mandato en lo que tiene que ver con las afectaciones al derecho a la salud. Tengo una pregunta muy concreta, pues también reconociendo los esfuerzos que ha hecho y que está haciendo esta administración frente a la pandemia en un tema tan urgente como es la administración de vacunas. Yo quisiera saber cómo está el proceso de vacunación de esta población migrante en situación de detención, vacunaciones contra el COVID-19 de la población migrante y también del personal que trabaja en estos centros de detención. Y una brevísima nota, la directora de Derechos Civiles pedía recomendaciones. Yo animaría mucho tanto al Estado como a la sociedad civil a tomar en cuenta el informe sobre empresas y derechos humanos que hicimos con la Comisión en 2019 y que precisamente pone luz sobre cuáles son las obligaciones de los Estados cuando se privatizan servicios que involucran derechos humanos como los de las personas privadas de libertad. Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
Muchas gracias, Soledad. Tania, la secretaria ejecutiva, quería preguntarle a la representación del Estado, que habló sobre la reforma a la política migratoria, si sería posible tener algunas generalidades sobre esa reforma, cuáles son los principales aspectos de la reforma que están pensando hacer en materia migratoria, y también los mecanismos de control que se tienen para verificar las actuaciones de las empresas que se encargan de la detención de personas. Are the questions clear? Yeah, okay. Okay, then now since we still have time, both parties took more time than they had, but we still have half an hour, so I will give 10 minutes to civil society and then 10 minutes to the state to answer our questions, okay? So then we can end on time. And thank you very much again, Wendy, for your testimony. I will give the floor, first of all, to civil society for 10 minutes.
Welcome.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for your questions and your observations. I think, as Commissioner, you've pointed out, the number of actions of CRCL is impressive and also is reflective of the inherent violative nature of detention of migrants and the criminalization of migrants and the rights abuses that transpire. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Azadeh Shashahani to speak more specifically as to the situation in Georgia, and then Setare Gandahari will talk a little bit more in response to the other questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It is encouraging that the U.S. government has finally decided to go ahead and end the contract for the Irving County Detention Center. I would like to note again, though, that if it wasn't because of the documentation work happening, this would not have happened. And the fact that ICE knew as far back as 2018 about the violations against women's bodies and didn't do anything is very concerning. And I didn't hear anything in the presentation from the US government to address that. Where is the accountability? These women have been left with these violations, their spirits, their bodies have suffered, and they will have to live with the lifelong damage. And yet we're not hearing anything about accountability for the actors, for the prison corporations and for the US government representatives that made this possible. Irving is still open. We haven't been given a clear timeline as to when the US government plans to shut the place down. Again, we are very glad to hear that it will shut down, but people continue to be transferred to Irving, and it is cause for huge concern. And also another thing that I didn't hear from the US government a clear answer to is why are people being transferred to the Stewart Detention Center? The US government started detaining women at Stewart in December. Clearly, they could foreshadow what would come in terms of, the ultimate closure at Irving, and they decided that they needed a quick alternative. Except that, as I mentioned during the course of my remarks, this is a deadly place. 8 people have died at Stewart in the past 4 years, 2 of them by suicide. There's a forced labor program at Stewart. So it boggles the mind as to why the US government thought that this is any type of proper place to provide care to women, to providing reproductive care to women. There are now hundreds of women being detained at the Stewart Detention Center. And we have not heard anything about any plans to, slow down the transfers, start releasing people from a Stewart, shutting it down. This is a corporate-run detention center being run by CoreCivic, a prison corporation that has a horrible, horrible track record. And so those are the type of changes, actual concrete changes that we need to be hearing about. And then lastly, I also didn't hear anything about the surveillance of human rights advocates. It's cause for huge concern. We are trying to do our work in terms of exposing the violations, bringing them to the attention of the public. The people from ICE were talking about retaliation, taking away access to Stewart from a human rights organization because of their work. I myself received a demand, an order almost from a representative from ICE the spring of last year, after I tweeted about a hunger strike happening at the Stewart Detention Center. This representative from ICE ordered me to remove this tweet, which of course I did not, because this is the United States. Free speech is supposed to be a cornerstone of this country, and I know my constitutional rights, and I'm not going to stop exposing the human rights violations. But as you can imagine, this is frightening. For a human rights advocate to be receiving a demand like that from the US government is frightening. And for us to know that our activities and our human rights work, which is totally legitimate and constitutional, is being surveilled by the US government is indeed cause for concern. So I would really like to hear representatives from the US government to address the violations.
Thank you, Azadeh. I wanted to address this question of, the review of the system and inspections and improvement of conditions overall. Inspections and improving conditions has proven over decades through multiple presidential administrations, Democratic and Republican, to be woefully inadequate. Detention for any amount of time is harmful, and it runs contrary to human rights, the mere concept of immigration detention. The only acceptable response to the current review of the detention system is a decision to dismantle it. Immigration detention in the United States is not even a last resort. It's the default. There's no moral justification for it. And yet I will say that most people held in detention in the United States have communities and loved ones in the United States with whom they can live, who can support them as they navigate their immigration cases. Even the majority of asylum seekers arriving at the border, there is no need for detention, and detention is not housing. It's not an alternative form of housing. For those that require housing, there are trusted community-based organizations throughout the country, ready, willing, and able to provide shelter and services. Detention is not necessary for so-called compliance. The majority of those that are free attend their court dates, and those numbers are almost 100% for those that have attorneys. The alternative to this costly, morally and financially costly detention system is freedom and a system of community-based support and shelter and legal assistance for those that need it. And I want to just add on this question of alternatives to detention. They should never increase the scope of who is detained and who is surveilled. Alternatives should never include surveillance, which is inherently punitive and dehumanizing. So again, the only acceptable outcome of a review of the detention system is a decision to begin dismantling its use entirely.
Anybody else from civil society? You still have 4 more minutes?
Well, I can add one more thing, and then sorry, Sarah, I'll give it back to you. I just wanted to address this question of unaccompanied children at the border. And while we're appreciative of the swift action that the administration took to ensure that children don't spend time in Customs and Border Patrol custody, which is very, the conditions in CBP custody are horrific, and no child or adult should spend any time in that kind of detention. We note that the administration has been using these large-scale facilities that are also completely inappropriate for holding children, and are now the results are now being investigated for the conditions there. And what the administration really needs to be doing right now on that front is investing in a long-term vision of small-scale facilities to avoid these problems of potential abuse and poor conditions for children. And it's not just about how we're treating children when they cross the border, it's about our overall immigration policies and adopting policies that allow families to migrate together so that they are not separated, so that they are not unaccompanied. So I would really like the administration to be addressing those big picture questions when we're talking about unaccompanied children.
Thank you. And I'll just follow up on that. Something that we didn't totally address is the rights of the child. And while the United States has not ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, as Commissioner Mantia pointed out, Jus Cogens norms and customary international law are part of US law. And when we're talking about children, we always have to work to protect the best interests of the child. That comes about not only in talking about the detention of children, but in the separation of parents from their children when they are forcibly removed from their homes and taken into detention. And as you heard from Wendy, right, the trauma that falls upon the children as well as the parents when that separation happens is significant and cannot be ignored. And so I have nothing more to add. I want to thank the commissioners for their time. I want to thank Wendy for being with us today and testifying, and reiterate what you all have already highlighted, that the number of actions that are required by CRCL in response to the current system of immigration detention makes clear that the system of immigration detention itself is inherently violative of international norm. We have been talking about standards and improvements, as I noted in my introductory remarks, since 2008, maybe even earlier. And detention standards were put into place under the Obama administration, and yet we are still hearing these abuses. These cannot all be put at the feet of the Trump administration. This is about a system of detention that allows for people to be isolated in rural facilities behind barbed wire fences, where access to counsel and access to justice is extremely limited, and the resulting lack of accountability and investigation and lack of meaningful oversight over these systems results in the abuses that you've heard about today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the representatives of the state.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I will respond for the United States. Thank you so much. It's going to be hard to answer all of these questions in the period of time that I have. And so I hope that this is an ongoing dialogue. I want to emphasize that. And those that I cannot answer today, I will take back and work to answer. Our door is open at CRCL. If there are questions or that I can't answer, please email us at crclcompliance@hq.dhs.gov, crclcompliance@hq.dhs.gov.
You can always send, you don't have to answer all the questions now. You can always send afterwards all the questions we made. You can send them by written through the mission.
Thank you so much. We will work to do that. I also want people to know that they can reach us independently or through the commission. And I hope that that doesn't disrupt your procedures here today. With great respect to the commission, all of this information is very helpful to us. So please keep providing it to us directly or through the Honorable Commission. Thank you so much. Había una pregunta sobre una reforma migratoria y esto está en las manos del Congreso, como siempre. Lo siento muchísimo, pero está en las manos del Congreso. Nosotros estamos haciendo todo lo que está debajo de nuestra jurisdicción para ampliar los caminos a la legalización, un estatus legal para la gente, de asilo político, de estatus de refugiado, de reunificación de familias. Tenemos un nuevo programa para los menores en Centroamérica, Central American Minors Program, y bastante otras cosas. Estamos haciendo todo lo que se puede para abrir estos caminos más chicos o más debajo de nuestro control, que no son reformas migratorias, pero abren el camino. We need your ideas and how to further do that. And I'm sorry that there isn't President Biden put a bill before the Congress on day one, and we're waiting for Congress's response. Let's see. When will Irwin close? I'm going to answer that question later, and I will get back to folks. Why transfer to Stewart? I'm going to answer that question later and get back to folks. With regard to the alleged surveillance of human rights advocates, that's something that my office is investigating, and any further information that you would like to provide us, please, with great respect to the commission, we are willing to hear it through the commission, and we're also willing to receive it directly at crclcompliance@hq.dhs.gov. We have an open investigation about what you're calling surveillance of human rights advocates. Let me see. With regard to whether or not we're going to close all immigration facilities, that's a very hard question, or whether we would close all private facilities. I'm hearing that there's evidence of problems in both private and US government facilities. And so I just wanted to mention that that's part of what it is that I'm hearing and that we're looking at. We take the allegations of human rights abuses seriously. We have multiple levels of oversight that we are reinvigorating, and we are getting responses to our levels of oversight that CRCL did not have necessarily in the past. As I mentioned, on May 20th, Secretary Mayorkas not only directed the closure of Irwin and the Carlos Carrero Immigration Detention Center, but also to continue to review concerns with other immigration detention centers regarding 4 factors. 2 of them have to do with issues that we're speaking about today. 1 is the quality of treatment of detained individuals, and 2 is the conditions of detention. And then there are other operational factors that we need to take into account. Please give us all the information that you have. We know that there are extensive records and reports and testimony and our own research from the past that we're taking into account. But again, the door is open to receiving more information about particular facilities. The national detention standards were promulgated in cooperation with ICE stakeholders, including civil society and the American Correctional Association. ICE also implements facility-specific policies in accordance with the relevant national ICE detention standards. Let me also talk about the number of people in detention. It has decreased 70% since the end of this FY 2019 and by 53% since the same time in FY 20. Currently, if you check the ICE website, there are 26,197 people in immigration detention. So that is a decrease despite an increase in crossings and in folks coming into the United States. We also have a need to take care of unaccompanied minors, and we have a need to take care of folks who may come with specific health conditions that we sometimes do so through the detention system. What are we doing to address the spread of COVID in detention facilities? Let me address that head on. And I hear you about prior administrations prior to the Trump administration, but the prior administration had no system in place to test or quarantine for migrants for COVID-19. We are coming from behind. Today, migrants entering ICE facilities are tested and they are quarantined if they test positive. And ICE has taken and continue to take important steps to safeguard the health and safety of those in its custody and to detect and mitigate the spread of COVID. These include a working group of medical professionals, disease control specialists, detention experts, and field operators working to identify enhanced steps to minimize the spread of COVID. We recommended that all facilities make efforts to reduce the population at detention facilities to 70% of capacity or less. And as I mentioned, it is down to 70% at the moment. And April 10th, ICE released the COVID-19 pandemic response requirements, a guidance document developed in consultation with the CDC that builds upon previously issued guidance. Throughout the pandemic, ICE has released several updated versions of the pandemic response requirements, the most recent of which was released on March 16th. ICE has implemented several prevention and mitigation strategies to reduce exposure to COVID, including testing, as I mentioned, but also conducting detailed medical screening of anyone entering the United States and isolating individuals who exhibit fever or respiratory symptoms in appropriate medical housing. Any individual who tests positive and requires a higher level of care is transferred to a hospital. Regarding vaccines, as with all medical procedures, ICE guidance will require the individual's consent in a manner and language that the individual understands and administer the vaccine in accordance with any restrictions based on the individual's medical history. At this time, a limited number of individuals in ICE custody have begun to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Since May 1st, 2021, a total of almost 4,986 individuals detained by ICE have received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. With regard to the Alternatives to Detention pilot project, it is just as described in depth in my testimony. It does include many of the factors that I just heard about. We're also, again, open to input on that, but it is truly an alternative to detention. It includes, we are aware of the high level of persons in alternatives to detention and outside of alternatives to detention who have been released, being able to, the data shows that they have complied with the requirement to come to their immigration proceedings. So we are aware of that data, and we're looking into a pilot project, and we're willing to hear more about how to implement the pilot project along the lines of the factors that I just stated. I just want to end by saying that, again, the door is open. I'm especially grateful for Ms. Dow for speaking. That sounds like a terrible, terrible trauma. And unfortunately, there's not a lot more than I can say besides because of ongoing litigation, but Irwin is closing. Thanks to your bravery. Thanks for helping other women who are in the same situation. I hope nothing like that ever happens again in US custody. And I'm working very hard to make sure that that happens. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your testimony. As a woman and a survivor myself, we are going to do everything to make sure that that doesn't occur again in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You still have 1 more minute in case somebody from the state wants to add something else.
Can I speak 1 minute, Ms. Dow?
Yes, you can.
What I
Of
forgot
course.
to let you guys know that I found out my fallopian tubes. Dr. Admin took it out, my fallopian tubes. Regardless, I have children. That didn't give him the right to take that from me. And I forgot to put it out there, so that's all I was telling you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I deeply regret that that happened to you. The Inspector General will be finished with their report soon, and there's ongoing litigation. I cannot say too much more aside from I deeply regret that happening to you, and there are laws in place to protect that from happening, and we will continue to work to enforce them better.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, again, thank you, Wendy, for being here. I think it's very important to give testimonies so that not only the state parties, but also everybody that is listening to the hearing can get a sense of what civil society is talking about when we have direct testimonies. The Commission has been very aware of what you have been talking about, especially in Georgia. We have been doing a follow-up on forced sterilization. Unfortunately, it is a practice in the continent, mainly against Afro-descendants, women, indigenous women, and poor women and Latin women throughout the continent. So I'm very sorry about what happened to you, and I hope you can have justice and reparation. While we were in the hearing, we received a letter. I just want to mention the letter because it just arrived while we were in the hearing, a letter from the Congress of the United States, from the House of Representatives, from a number of representatives. First of all, thanking for this hearing and asking for a site visit from the Commission to the ICDC and other immigration facilities, and also requesting for other actions such as full investigation and accountability and reparations to the victims. Of course, that letter we will be sending it to both parties so you can have the information. I understand it's a public letter, so it's okay. From the House of Representatives, I just want to state out the disposition of the Inter-American Commission to do a working visit to the Irwin County Detention Center and other such immigration facilities, such as the letter appoints, the letter I just mentioned, and also all our necessary technical support regarding all the matters that have been discussed in this hearing. As always, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has a technical team that can give a support to states and civil society in all the matters that have been discussed here. So I just want to stress out our disposition, both to carry out a site visit if that is an agreement with the state, and also to give any technical support you need on the matters we have discussed today. So I hope we can do a follow-up meeting regarding these matters. And hopefully it would be very helpful, I think, especially because of like the transition that the state has already talked about regarding immigration policies. Maybe the technical support that the Commission can give would be really important. So I just want to stress that out also. Thank you very much for everybody for all the information here, for the testimony, and thank you also for representatives of the state for all the information you have given us, and we will continue monitoring the situation, and hopefully we can work together on these such important issues. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.